The story of poor economics begins not with sweeping theories or lofty declarations, but with a quiet question. Why do the poor make the choices they make? Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo walk straight into the complexity, leaving behind the rigid formulas that have long dominated discussions about poverty. Instead, they take us into villages, clinics, classrooms, tiny shops, overcrowded homes, and the intimate corners of daily struggle, revealing a world far richer in nuance than any grand ideology can capture. The authors treat poverty not as a static condition, but as a constantly shifting landscape shaped by incentives, fears, beliefs, aspirations, and the limits of human attention. They show that poor households are not irrational, as some economists casually assume. They are simply navigating a reality where every choice is a trade-off, every opportunity comes with risk, and every small decision can ripple into the future. This book dismantles cliches. It challenges the idea that poverty persists because people are lazy, uneducated, or culturally deficient. Instead, it argues that poverty is often the product of bad systems, missing information, broken incentives, and environments that punish every misstep. Through meticulous field research and bold experimentation, Banerjee and Duflo offer a kind of economic storytelling that is grounded, empirical, and deeply human. As we dive into this expanded summary, we will explore the book's core chapters and the insights they uncover, insights that reshape how we think about aid, development, and the very nature of human behavior. The goal here is not to glorify theory, but to understand how small changes, when rooted in real evidence, can lift entire communities toward better futures. This is a journey into the fabric of global inequality, and like any good journey, it begins with curiosity, humility, and the willingness to question what we think we already know. If you want to uncover the secrets of poverty and understand the daily decisions shaping millions of lives, hit like and subscribe to our channel for more insightful book summaries. Chapter 1. Think Again, Rethinking Poverty. The first chapter asks us to do something deceptively simple: question our assumptions. For decades, discussions about poverty have swung between two grand poles. On one side are the optimists who claim that free markets, left untouched, will magically lift everyone. On the other side are the pessimists who argue that poverty is a trap so deep that only sweeping government intervention can save entire populations. Banerjee and Duflo gently dismantle both extremes. They explain that the poor live in a world shaped by constraints most economists never factor into their models. A small farmer in India doesn't ignore fertilizer because he is ignorant. He ignores it because a single ruined harvest would destroy him. A mother doesn't skip vaccination clinics because she is careless. She skips them because the clinic is often closed, the nurse is sometimes absent, and missing a day of work is a luxury she cannot afford. Poverty is not a single problem. It is a network of pressures that constantly pull a person's attention in every direction. The authors invite us to see choices the way the poor see them, through the lens of limited bandwidth, unstable income, and the absence of safety nets. When every risk feels existential, even beneficial decisions become terrifying. In this world, economic logic bends around fear, uncertainty, and the relentless demand to survive from one week to the next. The authors emphasize that the biggest misunderstanding about poverty is treating the poor as a monolithic group. They are not. They are individuals navigating unique circumstances, making decisions that often make perfect sense within the logic of their realities. This insight is both humbling and powerful. It means solutions must be grounded not in ideology, but in close observation and evidence. Chapter 1, then, is a reset, a clearing of mental space. It asks us to put aside big answers and start with small questions. It asks us to stop proclaiming solutions from afar and begin to listen to what the poor themselves reveal through their daily choices. The rest of the book grows from this simple but radical idea. To fight poverty, we must first understand how it actually works on the ground. Chapter 2 walks into one of the most emotionally charged puzzles in development economics. If hunger is so widespread, why don't the poor spend more of their limited income on food? The answer isn't moral judgment or irrationality. It's a deeper, more human story. Banerjee and Duflo begin with a striking observation from their fieldwork. The poor often choose tastier, more enjoyable food over more nutritious options, even when malnutrition is a real threat. At first glance, this seems contradictory, but the authors quickly pull away the moral simplicity and reveal the quiet, emotional economy behind hunger. Life in poverty is exhausting. It is a daily grind of uncertainty, repetitive labor, social vulnerability, and limited autonomy. In such a world, small pleasures matter immensely. A slightly sweeter drink or a spicy snack might offer a moment of dignity and joy, a reminder that life is not just survival. So when a family chooses a festival meal or a bit of meat over bland staples, they're choosing a taste of normal life. Seen from this angle, their choices become not irrational, but deeply understandable. The chapter also confronts another assumption, that hunger persists because calorie intake is too low. In reality, the body adapts. Many extremely poor individuals consume enough calories to function, but the nutritional quality of those calories is weak. Deficiencies in iron, iodine, vitamin A, and protein quietly erode health, productivity, and cognitive development. Hunger, therefore, is not always the dramatic image of starvation. Sometimes it is a silent process, fatigue, illness, reduced focus, low strength that shapes entire communities. Another key point unfolds: increasing income does not reliably lead to better nutrition. When the poor earn more, they rarely double down on staple food. Instead, they often diversify into better-tasting foods or into non-food items that bring satisfaction or status. It's a reminder that human decision-making is not purely mechanical. People seek meaning and pleasure, even in deprivation. Banerjee and Duflo highlight an important nuance. Providing more food alone isn't enough to solve malnutrition. What works, again and again, is changing incentives and making healthy choices easier. When fortified foods are accessible, when vaccinations and deworming are integrated, when information is simple and trusted, improvements in nutrition follow naturally. By the end of Chapter 2, the authors have reshaped the reader's understanding of hunger. Poverty is not a tale of people failing to make the right choices. It is a world where every choice carries emotional, cultural, and psychological weight. Hunger, like poverty itself, is not a single problem. It is a complex web of pressures, preferences, and trade-offs. This chapter leaves us with a deeper respect for the quiet resilience of the poor, whose decisions reflect not ignorance, but a constant balancing act between survival and the small joys that make survival worthwhile. Chapter 3 opens with a paradox so sharp you can almost feel its edges. Across the developing world, there are inexpensive, proven, almost ridiculously simple health interventions that save lives, yet millions of people don't use them. Clean water treatments, vaccinations, deworming pills, oral rehydration salts, all cost pennies, all can prevent devastating illness, and still, uptake remains staggeringly low. The authors invite us to look past the usual explanations. This is not about ignorance or apathy. It's about the complex psychology of decision-making under uncertainty and the invisible architecture of everyday life. The first insight is uncomfortable but illuminating. The benefits of many health interventions are invisible, while the costs, time, effort, inconvenience, are painfully visible. Drinking chlorinated water doesn't make you feel instantly healthier. Vaccinations prevent an illness you might not have caught anyway. Deworming improves cognition and long-term health, but you don't wake up the next day feeling like a different person. When people live on the edge, they tend to invest in things with immediate effects, not distant payoffs. A meal with richer flavor, a small festival expense, or a comforting ritual often feels more real than the abstract promise of future wellness. The authors then expose another obstacle: trust. For many poor communities, hospitals and clinics are distant, understaffed, poorly supplied, or dismissive of their concerns. It's little wonder that people prefer local healers who speak their language, share their worldview, and offer treatments that feel active and immediate, even if they lack medical basis. Placebo effect meets social bonding, and the result is powerful. Banerjee and Duflo highlight example after example where health outcomes improve dramatically only when the system makes the healthy choice easy, almost effortless. When chlorine is automatically mixed into municipal water, usage soars. When vaccines come to the village instead of the other way around, parents line up. When health workers receive small incentives or are held accountable, more children receive life-saving treatments. Then comes one of the most striking illustrations: the power of tiny nudges. In Rajasthan, offering a kilogram of lentils to mothers who vaccinate their children more than doubled vaccination rates. The lentils didn't change the value of the vaccine, they changed the experience. They tipped the scales in favor of action, overcoming hesitation, forgetfulness, and effort. The authors are brutally clear. Solutions exist. They're cheap. They work. The challenge is not discovering new medicine, it's understanding human behavior. Poverty forces people into a mindset of immediacy. They weigh risks differently. They can't afford experiments. Every choice feels heavy, every mistake costly. By the end of the chapter, we come to see health not as a purely medical issue, but as a matter of structure, trust, and psychology. The poor aren't rejecting solutions, they're navigating a world where the safest option is often the one that feels reliable, familiar, and low effort. Chapter 3 leaves us with a quiet lesson. If we want to improve health at scale, the real battlefield isn't knowledge or morality, it's the tiny frictions, the social fabric, and the way humans make decisions when life offers no margin for error. Chapter 4: Top of the Class: Education and the Real Barriers to Learning. Chapter 4 delves into one of the most emotionally charged and politically debated arenas: education. Banerjee and Duflo begin with a provocative observation. Across the developing world, children spend years in school, yet learning outcomes are often shockingly low. Attendance is one thing, actual comprehension is another. The authors invite us to examine why this gap exists and what it tells us about poverty, incentives, and human behavior. They reveal a paradox. Even when schools exist, teachers are often absent, curricula are poorly implemented, and students leave without basic literacy or numeracy. This is not because teachers are lazy or students are incapable, but because the system lacks accountability and motivation. In classrooms where effort is unrewarded and consequences are invisible, low performance becomes the default. Another striking insight is the role of incentives. Banerjee and Duflo show that small changes can produce dramatic improvements. In one experiment, giving teachers performance-based bonuses led to measurable gains in student learning. In another, providing students with small rewards for attendance or performance created meaningful engagement. The point is clear: behavior responds to incentives, even in contexts where poverty and infrastructure might seem overwhelming. The chapter also examines the home environment and the subtle economic pressures shaping learning. Poor families may value education but are constrained by time, money, and opportunity cost. Children are often expected to work, care for siblings, or contribute to household income, limiting their ability to benefit from school. Banerjee and Duflo stress that education policy cannot ignore these realities. Effective solutions must account for both supply, schools, teachers, curricula, and demand, family incentives, motivation, and constraints. Finally, the authors challenge common assumptions about learning. Simply building schools or hiring teachers is insufficient. The quality of instruction, monitoring of performance, and alignment of incentives matter far more than infrastructure alone. They emphasize experimentation, testing interventions rigorously to understand what actually improves learning, rather than assuming solutions based on ideology or intuition. Chapter 4 leaves readers with a clear message. Education is not just about access, it's about making learning effective, motivating both teachers and students, and recognizing the economic and social pressures that shape behavior. Real change comes not from theory alone, but from understanding the micro-decisions that drive everyday life in poor communities. Chapter 5: The Men from Kabul and the Mist of Microcredit. Understanding Credit and Financial Decisions. Chapter 5 turns to the world of finance in poverty, exploring why access to credit, often hailed as a panacea for development, produces mixed results. Banerjee and Duflo start by examining microcredit, the small loans provided to poor entrepreneurs. While these loans are celebrated as revolutionary, the authors caution that their effects are far from automatic. They highlight a fundamental truth: the poor are careful, risk-averse decision-makers. Loans are not magic wands. They are obligations that can backfire if invested in unprofitable ventures or consumed inappropriately. Many recipients use microloans to smooth consumption, cover emergencies, or repay old debts. Practical decisions that do not create transformative wealth, but prevent disaster. This is rational behavior, not failure. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of context. In some villages, microcredit leads to small business growth and modest improvement in income. In others, it barely changes living standards. Outcomes depend on local economic opportunities, infrastructure, and the entrepreneur's skills. Blanket policies, they argue, cannot replace careful understanding of each community's realities. Another insight centers on behavioral economics. Even when loans are available, the poor often avoid borrowing. Fear of debt, social pressure, or uncertainty about returns can outweigh potential benefits. This reluctance reflects a sophisticated cost-benefit calculation shaped by scarcity and risk. Banerjee and Duflo show that recognizing these psychological and social factors is crucial for designing effective financial interventions. Finally, the authors explore alternatives to credit that sometimes outperform traditional microloans. Direct transfers, savings programs, or interventions that reduce risk can be more effective than simply providing loans. The chapter reinforces the book's central theme: poverty is complex, and solutions must be tailored to real human behavior, not idealized economic models. By the end of Chapter 5, readers gain a nuanced understanding of financial decision-making under scarcity. Poverty is not a lack of initiative, it is a landscape of constraints, trade-offs, and carefully considered choices. Effective policy and aid must engage with this reality, rather than assuming that providing resources alone guarantees transformation. Chapter 6: Barefoot Hedge-Funders, Saving and the Logic of Scarcity. Chapter 6 explores the complex world of savings, investment, and financial behavior among the poor. Banerjee and Duflo begin by challenging the assumption that poverty persists because the poor are unable or unwilling to save. On the contrary, poor households often save meticulously, but the methods and motivations are shaped by scarcity and risk. The authors illustrate that small, consistent savings are often directed toward immediate, tangible goals: school fees, medical emergencies, festivals, or family obligations. These choices may seem short-sighted to outsiders, but they reflect a careful balancing act between future security and present survival. In a world without reliable safety nets, every rupee is precious, and every risk is carefully weighed. Banerjee and Duflo highlight the phenomenon of mental accounting, how the poor categorize money into different buckets to prevent overspending. For example, separate envelopes or accounts for school fees, medical emergencies, or weddings help households manage scarcity and resist temptation. These systems are not arbitrary, they are behavioral adaptations to financial vulnerability. The chapter also examines formal versus informal savings mechanisms. Banks and microfinance institutions often fail to cater to the behavioral realities of the poor, with inflexible withdrawal rules or high perceived costs. In contrast, informal savings groups, rotating savings, or home-based safes often succeed because they align with the psychological and practical realities of scarcity. The poor do not save less, they save differently. A central theme emerges. Poverty distorts financial decision-making not through ignorance, but through necessity. Risk aversion, immediate needs, and cognitive load shape every choice. Policies that aim to increase savings must therefore reduce friction, simplify decisions, and create trustworthy mechanisms that resonate with daily realities. By the end of Chapter 6, readers understand that saving is not a matter of character, but of context. The poor are disciplined and strategic with their resources, navigating scarcity with a combination of ingenuity, restraint, and careful prioritization. Poverty is a complex puzzle, and understanding how the poor manage money is key to crafting interventions that actually work. Chapter 7: Reluctant Entrepreneurs: The Complex Realities of Small Businesses. Chapter 7 dives into the world of micro-entrepreneurship, exploring why small businesses in poor communities often fail to generate significant wealth or escape poverty despite being run by hard-working and capable individuals. Banerjee and Duflo challenge the romanticized notion that entrepreneurship alone is the key to economic mobility. The authors show that most small businesses operate in fragile, highly competitive markets. A street vendor selling goods in a crowded marketplace faces constant risk, fluctuating demand, sudden expenses, theft, or illness. Even when the business is profitable, profits are often modest and precarious, barely enough to cover household needs. The entrepreneurs are not lazy, they are constrained by environment, access to capital, and market saturation. Another insight from this chapter is the choice of stability over risk. Many poor individuals run businesses not because they aim to grow them into wealth-generating ventures, but because self-employment offers flexibility and a measure of security compared to wage labor. Entrepreneurship in these contexts is often a survival strategy rather than a wealth maximization strategy. Banerjee and Duflo also explore the role of credit and training. Microloans and skill-building programs can help some businesses expand, but outcomes are inconsistent. Success depends heavily on timing, local opportunities, and the entrepreneur's environment. Blanket interventions rarely succeed without attention to the micro-details of each context. The chapter emphasizes a recurring theme of the book. Poverty is not simply a lack of ambition or talent. The poor often make deliberate, rational decisions based on their constraints and risks. Policies and interventions that ignore these realities risk failure, no matter how well-intentioned they are. By the end of Chapter 7, the reader grasps the fragile logic of micro-enterprise. Entrepreneurship is not a guaranteed path out of poverty, but it is a careful balancing act shaped by risk, necessity, and the realities of local economies. Understanding these nuances is essential for anyone seeking to support small businesses in low-income settings effectively. Chapter 8: Saving Brick by Brick: How Small Changes Can Make a Big Difference. Chapter 8 examines the power of incremental interventions and how small, well-designed changes can significantly improve the lives of the poor. Banerjee and Duflo illustrate that poverty is often entrenched not by one huge obstacle, but by a constellation of small barriers, each seemingly minor, yet together they can trap people in cycles of deprivation. The authors begin by revisiting the topic of savings and financial behavior, highlighting experiments that show how small incentives can dramatically increase the likelihood of saving. For instance, when banks offer commitment savings accounts with withdrawal restrictions, poor households are more likely to save consistently for long-term goals. These seemingly minor adjustments, nudges that reduce temptation and make the benefits of saving clearer, can accumulate into substantial improvements over time. Another focus is on health and education interventions. Simple measures such as reminder calls for vaccination appointments, free deworming campaigns, or small rewards for school attendance can dramatically change outcomes. These interventions work not because they provide enormous resources, but because they lower the barriers to action and align incentives with desired behaviors. Banerjee and Duflo emphasize that small, evidence-based changes often outperform grand, sweeping policies. The challenge for policymakers and development workers is to understand the micro-level realities of the poor and design interventions that fit the logic of their daily lives. This requires rigorous experimentation, careful observation, and a willingness to iterate based on what works rather than on ideological assumptions. The chapter also explores the role of trust and social networks. People are more likely to adopt new practices or participate in programs when they see peers benefiting, when local leaders endorse initiatives, or when the interventions are culturally sensitive. Social context, not just economic incentives, can magnify the impact of small changes. By the end of Chapter 8, the book drives home a critical point. Poverty is not insoluble. Transformative improvements do not always require massive resources or radical upheaval. Instead, a careful understanding of behavior, context, and small targeted interventions, implemented thoughtfully, can yield powerful cumulative effects that gradually lift people out of poverty. Chapter 9: The Men from the Village: Social Norms, Networks, and Collective Behavior. Chapter 9 explores the social dimensions of poverty, showing that decisions are rarely made in isolation. Banerjee and Duflo illustrate how social norms, peer behavior, and networks profoundly influence choices, often as much as economics or incentives. They begin with a striking observation. In many communities, what seems like irrational behavior is actually conformity to local norms. For example, families may underinvest in girls' education not because they undervalue it personally, but because they fear social backlash or believe others will not support such decisions. Similarly, health behaviors, savings, or business strategies are shaped by what neighbors do and approve of. The chapter emphasizes the role of peer influence. Banerjee and Duflo cite experiments where introducing small changes in one household or village led to ripple effects through social networks. When a respected family adopts vaccinations, savings programs, or new farming techniques, others are more likely to follow. Change, they argue, often spreads contagiously, but only when it is visible, credible, and socially sanctioned. Another insight concerns collective action problems. Communities may fail to adopt beneficial practices not because individuals are unwilling, but because coordination is difficult. Pooling resources for a communal well, maintaining a school, or running a cooperative business requires trust and enforcement mechanisms, which are often weak in poor contexts. These social challenges can amplify the constraints of poverty even when resources and knowledge are available. By the end of Chapter 9, the reader sees that poverty is not only a matter of scarce resources, it is embedded in social structures, norms, and networks. Solutions that ignore these dimensions risk failure, no matter how rational or well-funded they appear. True progress comes when interventions align with both the economic and social logic of the communities they aim to serve. Chapter 10. Escaping Poverty. Lessons from Field Experiments. Chapter 10 brings together the book's core insights, demonstrating how carefully designed interventions, grounded in real-world evidence, can help the poor escape the cycle of poverty. Banerjee and Duflo emphasize that there is no single solution. Poverty is a multi-layered problem, and each layer requires tailored approaches. The authors begin by highlighting the power of randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, in development economics. These experiments allow researchers to test policies in specific contexts, measuring what truly works and what does not. Unlike traditional top-down policies, RCTs reveal the nuances of human behavior under scarcity, how small changes in incentives, information, or access can lead to significant improvements in health, education, and income. A key theme of the chapter is the importance of small, targeted interventions. Banerjee and Duflo show that initiatives such as providing free or low-cost vaccinations, improving school attendance through small incentives, or making basic financial services accessible can cumulatively create profound effects. These actions may seem minor individually, but together they transform opportunities and outcomes. The authors also revisit the logic of trade-offs and scarcity. The poor constantly weigh immediate needs against long-term goals, and interventions succeed when they fit seamlessly into these daily calculations. Solutions that ignore the mental load of poverty or the invisible costs of time and effort often fail, no matter how well-intentioned. Banerjee and Duflo close with a broader lesson. Escaping poverty requires humility, observation, and a willingness to experiment. Development is not about grand theories or ideological prescriptions. It is about listening to the poor, understanding their realities, and iteratively testing solutions that work on the ground. This approach respects the agency of the poor while providing practical, evidence-based pathways to improvement. By the end of Chapter 10, readers grasp the overarching message of poor economics. Poverty is complex but not hopeless. Through careful study, targeted interventions, and deep respect for human behavior, we can design solutions that genuinely improve lives, one small, evidence-backed step at a time. Chapter 11. Policies and Promises. Scaling What Works. Chapter 11 focuses on the translation of insights from micro-level experiments into large-scale policies. Banerjee and Duflo recognize that discovering what works in a single village or school is only the first step. The real challenge lies in scaling these solutions effectively without losing impact. The authors highlight a central tension. What works locally may fail when applied broadly if contextual differences are ignored. A program that increases school attendance in one district might flop in another due to cultural norms, infrastructure limitations, or differing levels of trust. They stress that scaling requires sensitivity to local conditions, iterative testing, and continuous monitoring. Another key point is the role of government and institutional capacity. Policies backed by political will, adequate funding, and strong implementation structures tend to succeed more than well-intentioned but loosely managed programs. The authors caution against assuming that money alone is sufficient. Effectiveness depends on execution, accountability, and alignment with local realities. Banerjee and Duflo also examine the importance of evidence-driven policymaking. Rather than relying on ideology or conventional wisdom, governments and organizations should adopt an experimental mindset, testing interventions, measuring outcomes rigorously, and adapting strategies based on results. This approach mirrors the methodology of micro-level field experiments, but on a larger scale. The chapter concludes with a sobering but optimistic insight. Solutions to poverty exist, but they require patience, humility, and empirical rigor. Incremental changes, informed by careful observation of human behavior and tested interventions, can collectively drive substantial improvements. The challenge is not lack of ideas, but the thoughtful translation of evidence into sustainable, large-scale policies. By the end of Chapter 11, readers understand that scaling successful interventions is as much an art as a science, requiring insight, flexibility, and a steadfast commitment to learning from both successes and failures. Chapter 12. Rethinking Poverty: The Road Ahead. Chapter 12 serves as the culmination and reflection, where Banerjee and Duflo synthesize the lessons learned throughout poor economics and offer a vision for the future of development. They argue that rethinking poverty requires moving beyond simple narratives and embracing complexity. The authors emphasize that poverty is not caused by a single factor, lack of education, laziness, or poor policy, but is the result of interacting economic, social, and psychological constraints. Understanding these interactions is essential to crafting effective interventions. They remind readers that the poor are rational actors, making decisions within the bounds of scarcity, risk, and social pressures. Solutions must align with this reality rather than imposing ideals from afar. A recurring theme is the power of small, evidence-based actions. Even minor, carefully designed interventions, nudges in behavior, better access to services, small incentives, or improved information can have cumulative, transformative effects. Poverty is not invincible. It is entrenched in systems that can be changed if we carefully study human behavior and test solutions rigorously. Banerjee and Duflo also stress the importance of humility in policy design. Policymakers and development practitioners must acknowledge the limits of their knowledge and learn from experiments, successes, and failures alike. There is no universal prescription. What works in one context may fail in another. Flexibility, adaptation, and continuous learning are essential. Finally, the chapter reflects on the ethical dimension of development. Helping the poor is not charity, but a recognition of human potential and dignity. By understanding the real constraints people face, respecting their choices, and designing interventions that work in practice, we can make meaningful strides against poverty. Chapter 12 leaves readers with a clear, actionable insight. Ending poverty is possible, but only through careful observation, experimentation, and a willingness to rethink assumptions about what works and what matters most. It is a call to action for anyone engaged in development, to be curious, empirical, and compassionate in addressing the challenges of poverty. Conclusion: Understanding poverty through evidence and human behavior. Poor economics leaves readers with a profound and practical insight. Poverty is not a monolithic problem, nor is it caused by laziness or ignorance. Instead, it's a complex interplay of economic constraints, social norms, psychological pressures, and institutional failures. Banerjee and Duflo show that the poor are rational actors navigating a world of scarcity, risk, and limited opportunities. The book emphasizes that small, carefully designed interventions, grounded in rigorous evidence, can have transformative effects. Simple changes like providing incentives for vaccination, improving school attendance, offering accessible financial tools, or redesigning microloans to fit local realities can cumulatively lift communities out of poverty. The key is understanding the micro-level choices people make and designing policies that respect these realities. A central lesson is the importance of experimentation, humility, and observation. Development work succeeds when policymakers and practitioners test solutions, learn from failures, and adapt strategies based on what actually works in the field. Ideology alone cannot replace careful empirical study. Ultimately, poor economics reframes the fight against poverty. It is not about grand gestures, but about paying attention to human behavior, constraints, and incentives. By combining rigorous research with a deep respect for the lives and decisions of the poor, we can design interventions that are both effective and sustainable. If you enjoyed this summary and want to learn how small changes can make a big impact, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to get more book summaries that expand your horizons.